So, my talk. I want to talk a little bit about classroom assessment techniques and something I tend to call lightweight feedback mechanisms. Now, I'm going to be presenting this in without slides. I'm going to be doing this as a in screen. So if I can actually just right click on my window and put fit to frame, because that will show you everything and you should be able to see little pictures pop up on my screen like that. So classroom assessment techniques. Usually really good ways of checking that students are following, that students understand what you're doing, that students understand what you're talking about. And as a general rule, they're accepted as pretty good practice. It's a really good way of knowing that students are following along with what you're doing. However, this doesn't necessarily work in an online space. Most of the kind of classroom assessment techniques that people will be familiar with are stuff like targeted questioning. So you get to the end of a section, and you say, "So, okay, who can tell me what, who won the Battle of Hastings?" And you look round, no one's, and you pick somebody, and that gives you an idea of the sense of the room, whether they're following what you're doing or not. Another really popular classroom assessment technique is the muddiest point. Now, I'm going to quickly post something into the chat. Who has heard of the muddiest point? So, if you look into the chat, can I ask you to do one of two things? If you have heard of the muddiest point, can you give it a thumbs up? If you have not heard of muddiest point, can you give it a shocked face, please? If you just hover over the question, the point, it will give you the option to just do it directly onto the point. Brilliant. So I think that's a relatively good mix. So what I will say is I'm going to be trying to do a couple of little bits and pieces like this before. Now, as I type something, if I type hello, if you hover over with your mouse on my hello, it will give you the option to emote on that hello. So you can do things like put a heart, or you can put a smiley face and frowny face and so on and so forth. Now, the muddiest point, if you haven't heard of it before, is a classroom assessment technique where everyone gets a little piece of paper, maybe a post-it note at the end of a session, and they write down what the muddiest point from that lecture was. So the muddiest point, the bit that they didn't understand, the bit that needs further clarification. And the idea being that you can take that, you can analyze it, and you can bring it back to the next session as a point for follow-up. But how does this work online? Now, can I ask, has anybody used Poll Everywhere? And again, I'm just going to do this quickly on here. Have you used Poll Everywhere? Again, thumbs up for yes, shocked face for it, and just do it directly on the emote.
Chris, can I ask, this is obviously a feature within Teams. We are a Zoom university.
Okay.
If the same thing is possible in Zoom, but I haven't explored it. But is it? Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do some of this kind of stuff in Zoom.
Okay.
So this is Teams. I suppose the main point of this is to just kind of look at different ways of doing this, right? Now, Poll Everywhere, or other kind of feedback systems such as Microsoft Forms, really great, really useful. The problem that we tend to see when we're doing this in an online space is that you have to get students to click away from their screen. You tend to send them away to another system. Now, for anybody who's done any kind of web research, if you send somebody away from a page, the chances of them coming back can be a little bit problematic. And also, sometimes if you give some people a question to answer, they need a little bit of time to think about that. And they need to look at it. They need to have some sort of discussive position. before they can actually go into that and actually answer in a meaningful way. So sending away to poll everywhere, they might be spending some time thinking about how to answer that question while you're still presenting, which is a problem. Now, it's fine if they've got multiple screens, but how many people have multiple screens at home? In a classroom technique, this poll everywhere and things like this work really, really well, but not necessarily in things like Teams or Zoom, especially when you're expecting people to follow along with your slides. In a lecture, they can open up their mobile phone if they've got one, laptop if they've got one, and answer directly in there while still following what you're doing. Online, that doesn't tend to work. So what I've been trying to experiment with is a few different ways that we can go for classroom assessment techniques directly in here. So can I ask, is everybody following what I'm saying? And if you are, can I ask you to raise your hand? Now, in the middle bar where you'll see the camera on, mute, share screen, there's a little raise hand symbol. Okay, now in Teams, I can quickly see that everybody is basically following along with what I'm saying. And again, this is something that transitions really nicely over into Zoom. And you can do similar things in chats as well. You can just put hand up or emote or whatever, as we've been doing in the side. So now I'm just going to ask everyone to put your hand back down. Again, just click that hand symbol again to lower it. So by doing this, I've not actually sent you anywhere else. I've got a quick message of who's understanding, who isn't, without having to send people away. I don't have a hands up option. It might be an old version of Teams. Everyone, including the web version, should have it now. So probably if you update Teams, it should be there. So the next one I'm going to show you here is I'll ask you a question. And I want a very specific set of answers. There's plugins for other apps that allow me to do stuff. So if you're using Teams, this is really easy. I think there are versions for this in Zoom. So do you use classroom assessment techniques in session? Yes. No. So on Teams, there's an option in the bottom. It's a 3 dots, and you can add a form. And I can just drop this straight into the question like that. And that should give you the option to very quickly vote. Now, the nice thing about using the forms option is that stores everything in a very easy way for me to access later. So if I'm working with a very large group of students, so for example, as Gary knows, because he's been through, he's had the horror of going through one of my lectures before. I teach up to 270 students in a class. And sometimes I want to go back and look at that data. And actually, the kind of quick emoji kind of voting isn't so good. And I can analyze this back using forms. You can have polls in Zoom. Brilliant. Yes. So I can very quickly go to that. I can look at the data, and I can actually do quite complex questions. I've put 2 versions up there, two options up there. I can put 6, 7 quite easily. Now, with all that considered, I'm going to write up another question. And again, what I'll say is hover over it and see if you can answer using emotes. What classroom assessment techniques would you prefer to use online?
Chris, can I ask a general question in relation to adding polls like this? And I think I'm right in saying that in adding a poll in Zoom, you have to do it before the Zoom session begins. Is that right? Does anyone know?
I think so, yes, with Zoom.
Whereas with this, you're able to do it.
With Teams, I can do it dynamically, which for me makes it better as a classroom assessment technique, because I don't always know the questions I want to ask, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So on the question I've just posted up, what classroom assessment techniques would you prefer to use online? I have... Oh, great. So this is where technology fails me a little bit. So hands up at the top for if you'd use... I don't know now. The heart if you'd use forms. Emoji vote. So shocked face if you use emoji vote, which is this kind of thing I'm doing at the moment. And on the bottom right, a shocked face, sorry, a happy face if you do something else, something like poll everywhere. And I should be able to just change that.
Can I just ask, are those backgrounds that you're using?
No, they're not. So I'm using OBS to create custom overlays. So OBS allows me to create a virtual camera. So it captures my input device, adds whatever I want to it through this different system, and then reprojects it through to Teams. I've written up a fancy guide on it if you want me to share that in the chat.
I was just looking for a mind-blown emoji, but I couldn't find it. In relation to what you just said, Chris.
So, brilliant. So, so Kieran's actually just posted a really good point, actually. Is there a way to stop everyone from creating polls? Now, this will come down to how you've set up at the institutional level your environment. Because everybody on Pedagogy Pancakes is at the same level, we can all create polls and we can do that dynamically. That won't necessarily be the way with students. So you'll have to speak to your own kind of IT department to see whether that's going to work for you. Now, if I just go back to default, the ways I think these kind of work quite well. And again, what are the challenges with putting things in the chat? So I can sometimes say, is there anything anybody's not understood? I've got suddenly 20, 30, or 270 messages that I need to then quickly scroll through to try and analyze what's going on in my classroom. That clearly isn't going to work. By actually just getting people to vote on a post, I can go back to the one that I've put up here, and I can see that the vast majority of people would go for something like emoji vote. Vast people go for something for other. Some people go for emoji vote, and some people use forms. And that's fine. I can understand that relatively well. And we tend to know what the key points in our lectures are, so we can quickly get this kind of feedback on the fly. Where I think these things kind of work well, hands up is really good for a quick instant check. Who understands? Hands up. However, as anybody who's been in a meeting before knows, people forget to put their hands back down. You have to be quite on the ball with that. Forms are fine as long as they are short forms, because no one wants to sit around and wait for you to type out a form. The best way I've actually used forms quite dynamically in a session is by getting somebody else, a stooge, who knows what I want, or I will talk to them during the call, and they will type out while I'm presenting. And something like emoji vote tends to work for something really, really short and snappy. Yes, no tends to work quite well. I can get 4 options relatively easily. But as we found out today, somebody doesn't have that facility for whatever reason. Now, I said I would talk about this from a point of light back feedback mechanisms. I use these kind of techniques pretty regularly to get a measure of how my student satisfaction is going throughout a lecture. I don't like waiting for module evaluations, because by that point, things have got too late. I need to know quickly so I can make some changes. So I do things in a lecture where I'll pass everyone out a post-it note, and I'll get feedback at the end of every single session, or I'll work with the reps. This allows me to kind of get a scale. Who's found this challenging? Who's found this difficult? Who's enjoyed it? And I can do that very, very, very quickly. And again, if I'm using forms or emojis, I know that straight away. I get that data there and then. I don't have the standard of having to count the post-it notes. So with all that considered, has anybody got any questions?
I'm interested in Gillian's comment that she's just put in the chat about if you're presenting a lecture, have you tried the new Together mode? And if so, what did you think? I don't even know what that is. What is the Together mode?
I haven't tried using that yet.
Can you tell me what?
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I won't go on camera because I am eating my breakfast for this meeting. Just to say, what you can do is you can go into, if you click on your photograph or the right-hand top corner where your profile is and go into settings, on the first page, there's something that says, do you want to try the new visual experience? If you click that and then you come out of Teams, shut it down and then go back in, the next time you have a meeting with more than 4 people, you get the opportunity to have gallery view. So it's 7 by 7, much like Zoom. or you get together mode, where it pulls everybody out from their backgrounds and it puts them into a lecture theatre, so it looks like they're sitting in front of you in an auditorium.
So I've seen a classroom assessment turn 8 built just for that.
Yeah.
Where people are doing things like make shapes with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
So the one I saw was, right, everyone put your both hands up if you are following, cross your arms if you're not, put one hand up. And that seemed quite nice, apart from Microsoft's image recognition isn't that high fidelity. So every now and again, and you might have seen it if you move really quick or whatever, and you see bits of your background, it was cutting off arms, so it was actually quite hard to track. You've then also got to kind of manually kind of count things. But I think there's going to be options for that. I mean, I quite like the it's like the Guess Who mode, right?
Yeah, or Muppet mode, as Ian and Suzanne are just saying in the chat there, because it does look exactly the same. I think the good thing about it though is I find it easier to read the room.
Yeah,
if there's more than 10 people.
The only concern I've got with that,
you can always untick it and go back and take it off if you decide that you don't like it.
The only thing that concerns me is, I mean, we're in a room now of, let's see how many participants we've got in. We have 32 people in the chat, and not very many people with their cameras on. And I'm not trying to encourage, I'm not trying to press you to put your cameras on, but putting cameras on can be a little bit stressful. And at least what I've seen is most students are favouring not having their cameras on.
Yeah.
Which is the only thing that worries me about that is almost even highlights that a little bit more. We just go back to the chat because I'm about to hand over to the next.
Chris, I've got a quick question. It's Tracy.
Yeah, go for it.
In Libs, we are using Collaborate.
Yeah.
To deliver the lectures. So how would this kind of thing work? I haven't played with it since we finished the lectures end of term 2.
So Collaborate has its own options, so it still does have hands up. You can do, I think there are some tools embedded into Collaborate that allows you to do certain forms and things like that, but I haven't seen this level of fidelity in Collaborate. The other concern I've got with Collaborate is you can't do live captions. So I'm personally going to be favouring Teams for the size of, I think as long as your group is less than 100 people, Teams seems to give you a lot more functionality. The big advantage for me as well is for people who have hearing difficulties. Let's say they can click on those dots and they can get live captions from whatever I'm saying, which
okay.
I think is really, really valuable from an accessibility perspective.
So would I then just create a team within Teams that is basically the lecture group to the module?
Yeah, you can do that. And I think some people are actually, again, you can do it like this, where you can actually have community practice there as well. So, I mean, people can audit your module and just sit in.